Vivian Cross walked into that hospital room like she owned it. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open with the flat of her palm, her heels clicking against the tile floor, and she looked at Elena Moretti, lying in that hospital bed, pale, exhausted, 7 months pregnant, and she smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile you give someone when you've already won and you want them to know it. Dante, she said, not looking at Elena at all. The captains are waiting. All of them. Tonight, Elena watched her husband's face. She knew that face better than she knew her own hands. She had studied every version of it, the face he made when he was lying, when he was calculating, when he was afraid but couldn't afford to show it. And right now, standing between his pregnant wife and his mistress in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and wilting flowers, Dante Moretti was making the face of a man who had already made his choice and was just waiting for the courage to act on it. He straightened his jacket. He didn't look at Elena. "I have to go," he said. 3 words. 4 syllables. And just like that, the life Elena had built across 11 years, the sacrifices, the silence, the secrets she had kept to protect a man who clearly did not deserve them, cracked straight down the middle like old concrete under pressure. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling her daughter move a small, insistent kick, as if even the child knew something was wrong. And she watched Vivian Cross take her husband by the arm and walk him out the door. The room went quiet. If you have ever loved someone so completely that you forgot to protect yourself, then you already know what Elena felt in that moment. You already know that particular silence. But here is what Dante Moretti did not know, what none of them knew. As he walked out of that hospital room and into the waiting car, with his mistress pressed against his shoulder, Elena had spent 4 months building a room beneath his empire. And what was inside that room was going to change everything. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of story that stops you mid-scroll and makes you forget what you were doing, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we release stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Drop a like on this video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your country, wherever you are, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Elena did, you have to understand what she endured. Dante Moretti had not always been a man who walked away. There was a version of him. Elena had met that version, had fallen in love with that version, who would have sat beside a hospital bed all night without being asked, who would have held her hand through the worst of it and never once checked his phone. She had married that man at 24 in a small ceremony that his mother had cried through, standing in a garden in late October with leaves coming down around them. And she had believed, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has never been badly wrong before, that she knew exactly who he was. 11 years had educated her otherwise. The empire came first. It had always come first. Even in the early years, when he was still performing the version of himself she'd fallen in love with. The meetings ran late. The phone calls happened at 2 in the morning. The men who came to the house with their careful voices and their careful eyes, she learned not to ask their names. She learned not to ask anything, really. That was the bargain. Not a bargain anyone had spoken out loud, but it was there all the same, written in the silences between them, in the way Dante kissed her forehead instead of her mouth when he came home late, in the way he changed the subject every time she asked about his work. She had told herself it was protection. He was keeping her clean. He didn't want that world touching her. She had believed that right up until the morning she found the first message from Vivian Cross on his personal phone 8 months ago, when she was already 3 months pregnant and just beginning to show. She hadn't confronted him. That was the part people would never understand, the part that, if she told the story out loud to anyone, would make them look at her differently. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you leave? Because Elena Moretti had been listening. For 3 months before she found that message, she had been hearing things that scared her far more than a mistress. Fragments of conversation that stopped when she entered a room. A name she didn't recognize, Caruso, spoken in a tone that made her husband's shoulders go tight. A visit from Angelo Ferrante, one of Dante's oldest captains, who had sat at their kitchen table and eaten her food, and looked at Dante with something that was not quite loyalty, and not quite contempt, but lived in the uncomfortable space between them. She had a gift. Elena did not anything mystical, just the particular attentiveness of a woman who had learned early that survival required paying attention. She noticed things. She had always noticed things. And what she was noticing in those months before she found Vivian's messages was that something inside Dante's organization was turning bad. not from the outside, from within. So when she found the message, she made a decision that cost her every comfortable instinct she had. She put the phone back exactly where she'd found it. She said nothing. She kept her face neutral at dinner that night and asked him about his day, and listened while he lied to her, smoothly and without hesitation, the way people lie when they've been doing it long enough that it no longer feels like lying. And she started building her room. The idea had come from an unlikely place, a conversation with her father, years before he died, when she was still young enough to think that loyalty and love were the same thing. Her father had been a small man with careful habits and a locksmith's shop on a street that no longer existed. He had fixed locks for 40 years, and the one thing he'd told her, the piece of wisdom he'd pressed into her hands like a key, was this: every door has two sides, Elena. The one everyone sees and the one that matters. She had not understood it then. She understood it now. The warehouse on Kellner Street had belonged to the Moretti family for 30 years. It had been used for storage, briefly for processing, and then abandoned when the family's operations moved north. Dante had forgotten about it, or close enough to forgetting it appeared in his ledgers, as a depreciated asset, a line item, nothing more. But Elena had gone there, twice while Dante was traveling, and she had found what she was looking for, a sublevel room, accessible through a door behind a rack of rusted shelving, with no digital footprint and no security camera in range. She paid cash for everything: a cheap digital recorder, 3 prepaid phones, a portable hard drive. She drove herself always different routes, always during the hours when Dante's people were occupied elsewhere. She told herself she was being paranoid. She kept going anyway. What she collected in those months was not dramatic, not in the way people imagine when they picture a woman building a case against a conspiracy. It was slow, painstaking work, the kind that required her to sit very still and listen and remember, and then write it all down afterward in a code she developed herself. A simple substitution system her father had taught her when she was 8, playing games in the locksmith's shop after school. She collected names, dates, financial inconsistencies she found in the household accounts transfers that moved money sideways, through shell entities she recognized because Dante had once, in an uncharacteristically open moment during their 3rd year of marriage, explained to her how the family structured its holdings. He had trusted her with that once. He had forgotten he'd done it. She hadn't. She collected a recording she had not planned to collect. It had happened 6 weeks before the hospital night, a night when Dante was supposed to be in Atlantic City and she was supposed to be resting. And she had gone to the warehouse instead because she couldn't sleep, and because the itch at the back of her mind that told her something was about to break had become impossible to ignore. She had let herself in through the side entrance and was crossing the main floor when she heard voices above her. 2 of them. One she recognized immediately: Marco Bellini, Dante's underboss, and a man who had eaten at their table more times than she could count. The other voice took her longer, and then her blood went cold, because the second voice belonged to a woman, Vivian Cross. Elena stood absolutely still in the dark of that warehouse floor and listened to Vivian Cross tell Marco Bellini exactly how the next phase was going to work. She listened to the numbers, the accounts, the routing sequences, the names of the captains who had already been turned. She listened to the timeline. She listened to what they planned to do to Dante once it was done. She pressed the record button on the small device in her coat pocket, and she stood there without breathing until they finished. Then she walked back to her car and sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes, before her hands stopped shaking enough to turn the key. She had not planned to tell Dante. Not yet. She needed more. She was building something that would hold, not just accusations that could be dismissed, not just a recording that a good lawyer could challenge. She needed the financial documentation to match the conversation. She needed one more piece. She was 3 weeks away from having it when she went into the hospital with early contractions. Dante came, which she had not expected. He sat beside her bed for 2 hours, and he held her hand, and she let herself believe, briefly, stupidly, she would think later that some part of him was still the man she had married, that the weight of the pregnancy, the realness of their daughter becoming imminent and concrete, had reached something in him that the empire hadn't yet corroded. Then Vivian walked through the door, and Dante stood up. Elena watched his hand slip out of hers. She watched him process something quick and silent, a calculation, the kind she had seen him make 100 times across boardroom tables and in back rooms where decisions got made. And she understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water, that she was on one side of that calculation, and Vivian was on the other, and the result was already decided. The captains are waiting, Vivian said, addressing Dante as if Elena weren't there, as if Elena were furniture, as if the woman in that bed, 7 months pregnant with his child, was a problem that had already been categorized and set aside. Dante. Elena said his name quietly, just once. He didn't look at her when he answered. I have to go. He walked out. Vivian followed, and at the door she turned just for a second, just long enough, and looked at Elena with an expression that was almost impressed, of someone who had placed a difficult bet and watched it pay. The door closed. Elena lay there in the silence and breathed through her nose, slowly had taught herself to breathe when things went wrong, and she could not afford to fall apart. Her daughter kicked twice, insistent, alive. She pressed the call button. When the nurse came, Elena said she needed her personal bag from the chair by the window. She opened the bag herself, slowly, and found the small brass key. She kept in the inner pocket the key to the room beneath the warehouse, and she held it in her palm and looked at it for a long moment. Then she pressed it into the lining seam at the bottom of her old gray coat. The one she had worn for 6 years, the one Dante had always complained about because it was fraying at the collar, and she refused to throw it away. She folded the coat. She set it on the chair. She took off her wedding ring. She placed it on the bedside table next to the glass of water she hadn't touched. She started writing a letter, to whom she wasn't sure yet. She wrote 3 paragraphs and then stopped, because the words were not right, and she did not have time to make them right. She pressed the call button again. When the same nurse returned, Elena asked for her discharge paperwork. Mrs. Moretti, the doctor. I understand, Elena said. I'm aware of the risks. I need the paperwork. By the time Dante's car had reached the Belandi estate, Elena Moretti had walked out of the hospital through a side exit, taken a cab to a neighborhood where no one knew her name, and disappeared. Dante did not notice until the following morning. He had come home at 4 a.m. from the meeting. A meeting that had gone long, complicated by tensions between the captains that he was only now beginning to understand, and he had gone directly to the study without checking the bedroom. He slept on the couch in the study, which he had been doing more often than he acknowledged to himself, and when he woke up at 9 and went upstairs, the room was too quiet. He found the ring first. That stopped him. The ring had been on her finger for 11 years. He had not seen it off her hand since the week they were married, when she had been sick with flu and her fingers had swollen. He picked it up off the bedside table and held it, and felt something move through him that he did not immediately recognize, because it had been a long time since he had felt it. Fear. Simple, unvarnished fear. He found the unfinished letter next, on the bed, 3 paragraphs in her handwriting that stopped mid-sentence, the pen still resting beside it as if she had stepped away for a moment and intended to come back. He read the letter 3 times. She had not accused him. That was the thing that undid him. She had not written anything cruel or sharp, nothing that a person writes when they are trying to wound. She had written like someone who had simply run out of reasons to explain themselves to a man who had stopped listening. The letter described in 2 even paragraphs what she had seen. Not Vivian specifically, she didn't write the name, but she wrote about being left, about what it felt like to understand, finally, that the room she occupied in his life had always been conditional. The 3rd paragraph was half a sentence. There is something you need to know about the people around you, and I wanted to be the one to tell you, but I don't think... And then nothing. Dante sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. He called her phone. Disconnected. He called the hospital she had discharged herself. They told him, sometime after 10 the previous evening, against medical advice. He called her sister in Philadelphia. Her sister's voice, when she answered, told him immediately that she too something, and was not going to share it. She's not here, Dante. Is she safe? A pause. A pause long enough to mean something. She's not here. He hung up. He called Vivian. Vivian arrived at the house 40 minutes later, and she walked in with the particular ease of someone who has been waiting for a door to open and is not surprised to find it finally unlocked. She moved through Elena's house with a comfort that made Dante's jaw tighten in a way he didn't examine. She'll come back, Vivian said, setting her coat on the chair, Elena's chair, the one by the window, without being invited to. Women like Elena always come back. They don't have anywhere else to go. Dante looked at her. Something about the certainty of it bothered him. The too smooth delivery. The complete absence of concern about a pregnant woman who had walked out of a hospital against medical advice in the middle of the night. You don't seem worried, he said. Vivian smiled. I'm not. He watched her pour herself coffee from the pot he had made, using Elena's cups, and he felt the first small splinter of something working itself loose in a place he had been careful not to look. He did not say anything else. He sat at the kitchen table and drank his own coffee and looked at the window and tried to understand why the woman he had chosen to walk out of that hospital room with was standing in his kitchen talking about his missing pregnant wife with the calm of someone who already knew how the story ended. 3 days later, the first account went dark. $42 million, moved in increments small enough to slip past the initial monitoring systems, routed through a series of entities that should not have existed. Dante's financial manager, a quiet Sicilian named Enzo, who had worked for the Moretti family for 16 years, called at 6 in the morning and delivered the news in the flat voice of a man who has rehearsed how to say something terrible. "It's not one transaction," Enzo said. "It's a pattern. He paused. It started 4 months ago. Small amounts. The kind that don't trigger anything individually. 4 months ago." Dante stood in his study and did the math without wanting to. 4 months ago was when Elena had started going quiet. Not cold, she had never gone cold, which was part of what had made it easy to not notice. She had still made dinner. She had still asked about his day. She had still been present in all the ways that mattered on the surface. But something underneath had shifted, and he had told himself it was the pregnancy, the fatigue, the natural distance that grows between two people when they stop trying to close it. "Which captains have access to those routing structures?" Dante asked. Enzo gave him 3 names. One of them was Marco Bellini. Dante set the phone down without hanging up and stood very still in the center of his study and looked at the bookshelves that lined the east wall books he had never read, inherited from his father, arranged by Elena in their first year of marriage, because she said a room needed something that looked permanent. He thought about the unfinished letter. "There is something you need to know about the people around you." He called Enzo back. "Find me everything that moved in the last 4 months. Every dollar, every account, every entity. I want it on paper, not a screen." "Dante, that's going to take— I know how long it takes." "Do it." He hung up and went to find Vivian. She was in the sitting room, on her phone, and she looked up when he came in with the expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation and had already prepared for it. "Marco," Dante said. She shook her head slowly. "I know what you're thinking. Do you? You're going to blame someone inside the family because it's easier than accepting that Elena walked out and took something with her when she went." Vivian set her phone down and stood up, and she moved toward him with the particular grace that had always made him feel that she was in motion, even when she was standing still. She had access, Dante. 11 years of access. She knew every account, every structure, because you trusted her, and she used it. Dante looked at her. He had heard Vivian construct arguments before she was good at it, precise and economical, building a case the way you build a wall, 1 brick at a time, no gaps. But this one had a sound to it. A texture. He had heard it before in a different register, from men who were selling something. "Elena doesn't know those routing structures," he said. "You don't know what Elena knows. She doesn't touch the accounts. She never has." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "Then how did 42 million disappear?" It was a good question. It was a perfectly constructed question, and the fact that she'd known the exact number, a number Enzo had given him, 11 minutes ago on a private call, did not register immediately. It registered 4 seconds later, and by then Vivian was already talking again, and Dante was already nodding, and the moment passed. But it lodged somewhere, like a splinter, too small to grip, too sharp to ignore. On the 4th day after Elena disappeared, Captain Sal Ferrara called a meeting without asking Dante's permission. It was the kind of move that would have been unthinkable 18 months ago, Sal calling a meeting, choosing the location, telling Dante to come rather than asking. Sal had been with the Moretti family for 22 years. He had survived 4 leadership transitions, 2 federal investigations, and a hit that had taken 2 fingers on his right hand and left him with a slight tremor that he refused to acknowledge. He was also, Dante knew, not a man who made impulsive decisions. They met at a restaurant in Queens that Sal's cousin owned, a Tuesday afternoon when the place was empty except for a busboy who disappeared into the kitchen as soon as Dante walked in. Sal was already seated. He did not stand. "Sit down," Sal said. Dante sat. "I'm going to tell you something," Sal said, "and you're going to listen all the way through before you say anything. You understand me? Talk. 3 weeks ago, Marco Bellini came to my house. He said he was there for dinner his wife called mine. Very casual, very friendly. After dinner, the women went to the other room, and Marco sat across from me and told me the family needed new direction. He said you had lost perspective. He used that word specifically, perspective. He said there were opportunities that were being missed because the man at the top was distracted. Sal looked at Dante steadily. He wanted to know if I was interested in a conversation about transition. Dante said nothing. I told him no, Sal said. I told him I wasn't interested in any conversation about transition, and that if he had a problem with your leadership, he should bring it to you directly. He smiled the way men smile when they've already planned 3 moves past what you just said. Sal paused. Then he mentioned Vivian Cross, by name. He mentioned her in a context that told me she was not a surprise to him. Dante's hands were flat on the table. He was aware of his own stillness, the effort it cost. How long, he said. I don't know. But longer than you think. Dante drove home in silence. Vivian was in the house when he got back. She had been spending most of her time there since Elena left, and he had allowed it in a way that he was only now beginning to examine, and he walked past her without speaking and went upstairs. He went into the bedroom. He stood by the window. He picked up Elena's wedding ring from the bedside table, where he had left it, and he turned it over in his fingers. He thought about what Sal had said. He thought about what Vivian had said then. How did 42 million disappear? And the number, and the timing of it. He thought about the unfinished letter. He went to Elena's closet. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He opened the door and stood there looking at her clothes, the organized rows, the careful system she kept, by color, which he had always found faintly absurd, and which he now found, standing here alone in the house that no longer felt like a house, almost unbearably specific. Evidence of a person. Evidence of 11 years. He was about to close the door when he saw the old gray coat. He had complained about that coat more times than he could count. It was fraying at the collar. It was the wrong weight for winter and too heavy for fall. Elena wore it anyway, with the particular stubbornness she applied to things she had decided to keep, and every time he mentioned it, she looked at him with an expression that said she had heard him and was choosing not to agree. He took it off the hook. He was not sure why. Some instinct, half-formed, that he did not have language for. He checked the pocket's first habit, the habit of a man who had spent decades understanding that what people carry tells you more about them than what they say. The pockets were empty. He ran his hands over the lining, and his fingers found it immediately, a slight thickening at the bottom seam. He pressed it, and felt the small, hard shape of something worked into the fabric. He found the edge of the seam. He pulled it open carefully, and the key fell into his palm. Brass. Small. A number engraved on the bow, 447. He stood holding it and felt the world rearrange slightly around him, the way it does when you understand that the answer to a question you have been asking has been in the room the whole time. He went downstairs. Vivian was in the kitchen. She looked up when he came in, and her eyes dropped immediately to his hand. And for just a fraction of a second, the briefest flicker, something moved across her face that was not casual and not calm. She covered it quickly. But Dante had spent a lifetime reading the gaps between what people showed and what they felt, and he had seen it. "Where are you going?" she asked. He put the key in his pocket. "Out," he said. He was in his car before she finished forming the next sentence. The warehouse on Kellner Street looked exactly as he remembered it: chain-link fence, water damage on the west wall, the particular smell of a building that had been empty long enough to develop its own ecology. Dante had driven past it occasionally over the years, in the unfocused way you drive past things that no longer require your attention. He had not set foot inside in 4 years. He went in through the side entrance. The main floor was dark and cold. His phone's flashlight caught the shapes of old equipment, tarps, rust, the cumulated evidence of abandonment. He moved toward the back, past the shelving units, and found the door. The key fit. He stood for a moment before he turned it. There was something about the moment that he recognized the way certain decisions announce themselves, the particular texture of a threshold you cannot uncross. He had felt it only a few times before. On the night he took leadership of the family. On the day he married Elena, he turned the key. The door opened onto a narrow staircase, and at the bottom of the staircase was a room. Small, low-ceilinged, lit by a battery-powered lantern that Elena had left on a timer. It clicked on when he reached the bottom step, flooding the room in pale yellow light, and for a moment, Dante simply stood there and looked at what his wife had built. It was careful. It was meticulous. It was the work of someone who had planned for the possibility that she wouldn't be there to explain it. Photographs pinned in sequence along the left wall. The photographs were date-stamped, most of them shot through windows or from a distance, and they showed meetings he recognized, and meetings he didn't, and meetings that should not have happened between the people in them. Coded ledgers stacked on a shelf, 3 of them, each one covered in her handwriting. the same substitution cipher her father had taught her. He couldn't read the code, but he didn't need to. The numbers were clear enough, and the account structures were drawn in her hand, matching the routing sequences that Enzo had described to him that morning. A portable hard drive, and a small digital recorder in the center of the table, with a piece of tape on it in her handwriting that said one word, "Listen." Dante sat down in the single chair Elena had left in the room. He plugged the recorder into the small speaker beside it. He pressed play. He heard Marco Bellini's voice. He heard Vivian Cross's voice. He sat in that room for 47 minutes, and he listened to everything. When it was done, he did not move for a long time. The lantern hummed. Somewhere above him, the warehouse settled against the night wind. Dante sat very still with his hands on his knees and felt the specific, irreversible sensation of a man who has understood too late exactly how wrong he has been. Not about the Empire, not about the conspiracy, about Elena she had known. She had spent 4 months in this room, building the very thing that could save everything he had built, while he had stood in a hospital room and chosen to walk out the door with the woman who was planning to take it all from him. Elena had known, and she had not run, she had stayed. She had worked. She had been protecting him from a threat he hadn't even seen while he had been making her invisible. He looked at the recorder. He looked at the photographs on the wall. He looked at the ledgers in her handwriting, careful and precise, every detail correct. He put his face in his hands. He was not a man who cried. He had not cried since his father's funeral, 20 years ago, standing at a grave in November rain. But something in him now, some load-bearing structure that had been taking weight for a long time, made it sound like wood under too much pressure, and he sat in the room Elena had built and let it. Outside, his phone began to ring. He didn't answer it. He sat there in the yellow light of his wife's careful work and understood, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, what he had actually lost. Dante sat in that room for a long time after the recording ended. Not thinking, not planning. Just sitting with the weight of what he now knew, the way you sit with a wound before the pain arrives, that suspended moment between impact and sensation, when your body hasn't decided yet how badly you're hurt. The lantern hummed. The recorder had gone silent. Somewhere on the shelf above him, 47 minutes of his wife's careful work sat on a hard drive the size of a deck of cards, and Dante Moretti, who had survived 3 federal investigations and 2 attempts on his life, and a decade of navigating an empire, built on the willingness to make difficult choices, could not make himself stand up. His phone had stopped ringing, then started again, then stopped. He looked at the photographs on the wall. Marco Bellini and Vivian Cross, shot through a window at what looked like a hotel, bar the time said 8 months ago, 2 months before Elena had found Vivian's message on Dante's phone, which meant Elena had started watching before she found the message, which meant she had seen something else first. Something that had told her to start paying attention before she had any specific reason to. He thought about that. He sat with it. His wife, his quiet, gray coat wearing, book-arranging wife who asked about his day and made dinner, and had never once in 11 years asked him anything about the actual mechanics of what he had seen, something in the texture of the world around them that he, with all his experience and all his instincts, had missed entirely. That was the part that sat heaviest, not the betrayal. He had lived in a world where betrayal was a business tool, where loyalty was a performance, and allegiance was rented, never owned. He understood betrayal. He had executed it himself, more than once when the math required it. What he could not process, what kept snagging in him like fabric on a nail, was that Elena had seen it coming and had not run. She had stayed. She had worked. She had built this room and filled it with 4 months of her life, and she had done all of it in silence, without asking him for anything, without warning him, without protection, while carrying their daughter. She had done it to save him. He had walked out of a hospital room to attend a meeting organized by the woman who was robbing him. He picked up his phone, 7 missed calls, 2 from Vivian, 3 from Marco, 1 from Enzo, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, a prepaid, the kind used when someone doesn't want to be found. He called the prepaid number first. It rang 4 times. Then a voice he knew answered low, careful, shaped by habit into something that gave nothing away. "I wondered when you'd find it," Elena said. Dante closed his eyes. "Where are you?" "Somewhere you can't walk into with 4 men and a problem to solve." "Elena, don't." Her voice was level. Not angry. Anger would have been easier. This was the voice she used when she had already finished being angry and had moved into something colder and more permanent. "I need you to listen to me The way you apparently weren't capable of listening when I was standing in front of you. I'm listening. The hard drive has everything. The ledgers are coded, but Enzo can work through them. He's the only one in your organization, I'm certain. Vivian hasn't touched, because she needed someone clean to run the legitimate accounts through, or the whole structure collapses. The photographs are dated and sourced. The recording speaks for itself, a pause. There is also a manila envelope taped to the underside of the bottom shelf. Don't open it until you've listened to the full recording twice. Not once. Twice. I've twice, Dante. He stopped. The dead man protocol activates in 48 hours, she said. I set it up 3 weeks ago. If I don't reset it manually, copies of everything in that room go to every captain in the family. Everyone. Including the ones Vivian turned, because I want them to know that I know their names. He felt the structure of it landing. The precision of it. You built a tripwire. I built several. Elena, he said her name differently, this time not commanding, not placating. Just her name. The way you say something when words have run out, and the name is the only honest thing left. Is the baby? We're fine. The pause after it was brief, but he heard what lived inside it, the effort it cost her to say that, without letting anything else through. We're fine. That's all you need to know right now. Tell me where you are. I'll come alone. No, I need to... What you need, Elena said, is to go back to that house and look very carefully at the woman sitting in my kitchen and ask yourself why she knows things she shouldn't know and how long she's known them. And then you need to decide what kind of man you actually are. Because I've been making that decision for you for 4 months, and I'm done. The line went dead. Dante sat in the room beneath the warehouse and breathed. Then he reached under the bottom shelf and found the envelope. He didn't open it until he was in his car. He sat in the parking structure adjacent to the warehouse, with the engine running and the envelope on the passenger seat, and made himself wait 3 full minutes, an old habit. The discipline of not moving until the impulse had time to clarify into something cleaner. Then he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, in Elena's handwriting, were 5 names. Below each name was an account number, a dollar figure, and a date. He recognized 4 of the names immediately. Captains, men who had sat at his table, attended his meetings, shaken his hand at his father's funeral and at his wedding, and at the christening of his brother's son 8 years ago. The 5th name stopped him entirely. He read it 3 times. Then he folded the paper, put it in his inside pocket, and drove. He came through the front door of the house at 11:40 at night, and Vivian was awake, sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine and her phone and the specific composure of someone who has been waiting and has decided to make the waiting look effortless. She looked up. She assessed him the way she always did, quickly, top to bottom, reading the room from his posture, and he watched her arrive at whatever conclusion she arrived at and reset her expression into something warmer. I was getting worried, she said. Were you? You didn't answer your phone. I know. He went to the counter and poured himself a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink, and he looked out the window at the black rectangle of the back garden and said, without turning around, Where were you 8 months ago? The week of the 14th. Silence. What? The week of the 14th. 8 months ago. You told me you were in Miami for the Carrera meeting. He turned around. I need you to be specific. Vivian set her wineglass down. The movement was careful, too careful. The kind of care applied to things that might tip. Dante, what is this? Answer the question. I was in Miami. You know I was in Miami. You called me there. I called a number that rang in Miami. That's not the same thing. He looked at her steadily. There are photographs, Vivian, time-stamped, of you and Marco at the Meridian Hotel bar on the 15th, which is in New York, not Miami. The silence this time was a different quality, denser. Vivian's face went through something, a rapid interior negotiation, the kind he had watched people perform in interrogations, in meetings, in moments when the available choices were narrowing, and the mind was searching fast for the one that still led somewhere survivable. He watched her land. She picked up her wine glass. You found something, she said. Not a question. I found several things. Elena. She said the name like a diagnosis, like something that had been suspected and was now confirmed. She got to you before I could explain. Explain what? His voice was flat, not loud. Flat was worse, and she knew it. He could see that she knew it in the way her jaw settled. Explain the account movements? Explain the conversation with Marco about transition and new direction? Explain which part, specifically. It's not what it... Don't. He set his glass down on the counter with a sound was just slightly too hard. I have been sitting in a room for the last 3 hours listening to your voice. Vivian. Your actual voice. Having an actual conversation about actual numbers and actual names and an actual timeline for what happens to me when it's done. He paused. So I need you to understand that whatever you are about to say to me right now is being evaluated in that context. Whatever you say. Vivian was quiet. Then she did something he had not expected. She set the wine glass down, and she looked at him directly, without the performance, without the warmth she manufactured, and the ease she deployed like a tool. And she looked at him the way she had looked at him. He realized, only a handful of times in the years he had known her, directly, without architecture. How much did you find? She said. Everything. You don't have everything. I have enough. She stood up slowly. Dante. She said his name the way Elena had said it, his actual name, the weight of it, and it landed wrong because it was not Elena's voice, and the wrongness of it sharpened something in him. You and I both know that what Marco is building doesn't stop because you found a room. It doesn't stop because there's a recording. This is already in motion. The accounts are already frozen. He had called Enzo from the car. Every one that Enzo could identify from the routing structures in Elena's ledgers, 40 minutes ago. Something moved across Vivian's face. Fast, involuntary, the first truly unguarded thing he had seen from her in years, possibly ever. Fury, clean and hot and immediate, she controlled it. But it had been there. Those aren't all of them, she said. I know, you don't know which ones you missed. Not yet. Then you're not as safe as you think you are. She moved toward him, not threatening something else, the particular motion of someone who has decided that proximity is the remaining tool. Dante. I made choices, yes. I made choices because I looked at this organization and I saw what it was becoming, and I saw what you were becoming, and I made a decision about where to place myself. That's what people do in this world. That's what you've done. Don't stand there and perform outrage. I'm not outraged, Dante said. And that was true, which was perhaps the strangest thing about the entire night. He was not outraged. He was something quieter and more irrevocable than outrage. I'm done. Done. This conversation. With whatever this has been. He picked up his phone from the counter. You should leave. Tonight you can't. Vivian. He looked at her. I found the room. I have the recording. I have the ledgers. I have photographs that put you in a meeting you told me you weren't at. I have a list of 5 names, 4 of which I recognize, and I'm going to spend the next 24 hours confirming the 5th. He paused. You should leave. Because the alternative is that you're still here when I make the calls I'm about to make, and you don't want to be here for that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her coat. Her coat, not Elena's chair this time, he noticed, and she walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and she turned back once, and she looked at him with an expression that was not quite defeat and not quite threat, but contained elements of both. She's not as far away as you think, Vivian said. Dante went very still. Elena, Vivian's voice was even. I said she's not as far away as you think. I want you to sit with that. She opened the door. And I want you to think very carefully about who else knows she exists right now. She walked out. Dante stood in his kitchen for 4 seconds. Then he grabbed his phone and called the prepaid number. It rang. Rang. And on the 6th ring it picked up, but the voice that answered was not Elena's. The voice was male. Young. The particular flatness of someone reading a line they've been given. Mr. Moretti, it said. Miss Cross wanted you to know that everything is fine. She just wanted you to understand that it could stop being fine. The line went dead. Dante was already moving. He called Sal Ferrara as he went through the front door. Sal answered on the 2nd ring, an old man who kept old habits, who slept late and kept his phone charged and understood without being told that certain calls did not come at midnight with good news attached. I need people, Dante said. Trustworthy. Not Marco's people, his people are done. Yours how many? 4. Clean now where? He gave an address, a building on the east side, where he had kept a secondary apartment for 7 years, a place that appeared in no family record and no document connected to his name, a place he had shown Elena exactly once, on their 5th anniversary, as a kind of confession. There are things I keep separate from you for your protection. He had believed that when he said it, he had believed he was protecting her. I'll have them there in 40 minutes, Sal said. A pause. 20 Dante drove. He pushed through 3 lights on yellow and 1 on red, and he did not think about what Vivian's voice had sounded like. She's not as far away as you think, because thinking about it would do nothing, and he needed his mind clean. He got to the East Side building in 14 minutes. The apartment was empty. Of course it was empty. He had not expected otherwise, not really, but the emptiness had a specific texture, a glass of water on the counter, recently poured, still cold when he touched it. A chair pulled out from the table at an angle that said someone had sat there recently and left in a hurry. He checked the bathroom, the bedroom. He opened the closet. He found two things. A prepaid phone different from the one Elena had called him, on tape to the inside of the closet shelf, with a piece of paper folded around it. The paper said, in her handwriting, "If you're reading this, they found the first number. Use this one. Wait for me to call you." And below that, in slightly smaller writing, as if added as an afterthought, "I knew you'd remember this place, that's why I'm not here." Dante stood in the closet doorway with the phone in his hand and felt something that had no clean name, a compound thing. Part relief that she was thinking, part grief at what it meant that she had to. His own phone buzzed. Sal's people arriving. He went downstairs and met them in the lobby. 3 men he recognized from Sal's crew. Solid and quiet. The kind of men who had been doing this long enough to have learned that silence was more useful than language. He explained the situation in 2 minutes. Not all of it. Enough. "Find Marco Bellini," he said. "Don't approach him. I want to know where he is and who he's with. Call me the moment you have eyes on him." They left. He went back upstairs and sat in the empty apartment and looked at the chair at the wrong angle and the glass of water, and thought about Elena sitting here when, this morning, last night, and thought about the fact that she had known about this apartment and had used it as a dead drop, and had anticipated that Vivian would try to use her as leverage, and had moved before it could happen. She had been 3 steps ahead this entire time. He had spent 4 months being outmaneuvered by the woman he had been systematically ignoring, and the woman doing the outmaneuvering had been his pregnant wife. The prepaid phone buzzed. He answered it before the first ring finished. "I'm at a different location," Elena said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Don't try to track the call. Are you safe for now?" A beat. "She made a move, I know. Someone answered your first phone. They've been watching the apartment since yesterday. I saw them when I left this morning. 1 car, 2 men, parked across the street. I didn't go back." She paused. "Dante, the 48-hour clock is still running. When the protocol activates, the copies go out automatically. I can't stop it from wherever I am. I need physical access to the system to reset it. Then let me bring you in. If I surface before you've neutralized Marco's position, I'm a target. You know that. I know. And you're not ready to neutralize it yet, because you don't have the 5th name confirmed." He said nothing. "You recognized 4, she said. You didn't recognize the 5th. How did you? Because I didn't recognize it either, at first. It took me 6 weeks to confirm it." Her voice dropped slightly. "Dante, the 5th name is someone you speak to every week. Someone who has been inside our house." He waited. She said the name. The apartment went quiet in a way that was absolute, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, something that moved through the room like temperature dropping. He sat with it. He thought about every meeting, every conversation, every time that man had sat across a table from him and looked him in the eye and said the things that men in his position say to each other about loyalty, about family, about the particular sacred architecture of a life built on trust. He thought about Sal Ferrara calling a meeting. Sal, who had given him 3 names and had not given him the 4th. Sal, who had been careful and specific, and had pointed him toward Marco without ever pointing him toward himself. Sal. Dante said yes, Elena said, "I'm sorry." He closed his eyes. Sal Ferrara, 22 years. 2 fingers on the right hand gone to a hit that Dante had personally ordered avenged. The man who had answered on the 2nd ring at midnight and said how many and where and had sent 4 men. No, 3. Dante registered. 3 men to a location that Dante had just given him over a phone. A location where Dante was now sitting alone. He was on his feet before the thought finished. "Get out of there," Elena said, and her voice had changed. The steadiness was gone, replaced by something stripped and urgent. "Dante, get out right now." He was already moving. He hit the stairwell at a run, 6 floors, and he was on the 3rd landing when he heard the lobby door open below him, the specific sound of men moving fast and trying not to. He went up instead of down. He pushed through the roof access door and came out into cold night air and the low orange glow of the city. And he crossed the roof at a run and went over the parapet to the adjacent building, a 2-foot gap, a 4-story drop if he misjudged it, and landed hard on both feet and kept moving. Behind him, the roof access door on the first building opened. He did not look back. He ran across 3 rooftops, descended a fire escape on the far side, and came out on a street he knew he had walked it a dozen times, years ago, in a different version of his life. And he turned north and walked fast and kept his head down and breathed. His personal phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words. He knows you know. And then 10 seconds later, from the same number, a photograph. It was Elena. She was standing at what appeared to be a gas station, taken from a distance, slightly blurred a surveillance photograph, the kind taken from a moving car. She was facing away, but her coat was visible, the old gray coat he had pulled off the hanger, except she was wearing it, which meant she had a second one, or she had retrieved it. And in the photograph, her hand was pressed against her stomach in the specific gesture of a woman feeling her child move. Beneath the photograph, a message. We know where she is. Call off the frozen accounts in the next 2 hours, or the next photograph won't be from a distance. Dante stood on the street in the cold and looked at the photograph and felt something close in him. Not fear, not exactly, but the particular sensation of a man who has been outmaneuvered and knows it, and is calculating from a position of pure deficit, nothing in hand, nothing guaranteed. The people he trusted either turned or turning, his wife somewhere in the city, carrying their daughter, and a phone and 4 months of evidence that someone very badly wanted destroyed. He had 41 hours before Elena's dead man protocol activated. He had no allies he could confirm were clean. He had a photograph of his wife at a gas station and a 2-hour window, and a decision to make about what he was actually willing to do. He started walking. Dante walked for 6 blocks before he trusted himself to stop. Not because he needed to think thinking was already happening, rapid and involuntary. The kind of processing that happens below language, when the body understands that the situation has changed and the old maps no longer apply. He walked because movement was the only thing keeping the photograph from becoming the only thing in his head. Elena at a gas station, her hand on her stomach, the blurred edge of the image that told him the photographer had not wanted to be seen. He stopped at a payphone on the corner of a street that still had an artifact, the kind of thing that survived in certain neighborhoods because nobody had bothered to remove it. He had not used a payphone in 15 years. He fed it coins from his pocket and called Enzo's personal landline, which Enzo maintained because Enzo was 63 years old and had survived this long by not trusting things that could be hacked. Enzo answered on the 3rd ring. Don't say my name, Dante said. Listen. A pause, then I'm listening. The accounts you froze tonight, are they still frozen? Yes. Leave them. Don't touch them. Don't reverse anything. Don't take any instruction from anyone telling you to reverse them. Not from me in person, not from a phone call, not from a written order. Nothing moves until I am physically in front of you. You understand? Another pause. Longer. There's a problem. Dante waited. Marco Bellini called me 40 minutes ago. He said you'd authorized a release of the freeze. He gave me the correct authorization sequence. Dante's jaw tightened. Did you release it? No. Enzo's voice was careful. Because he gave me the correct sequence, which you and I both know you would never give to a third party. So I told him the system needed a secondary confirmation, and I've been waiting to hear from you. Dante exhaled slowly. You're a careful man, Enzo. I've worked for careful men, I learned. The sequence is compromised. Change it. New protocol, nothing moves without a phrase we're going to agree on right now, spoken by me in person in Italian. He paused. My mother's town, Caltanissetta, Enzo said. That's the phrase. Nothing without it. Understood. A beat. Dante. How bad is it? It's bad. He looked down the empty street. A cab passed, slowed, moved on. Sal Ferrara. The silence on the line had a quality that Dante recognized the silence of a man absorbing something he had feared was possible and had hoped was not. How sure are you? Enzo said. Sure enough to be standing on a street corner using a payphone. I see. Another pause, and the other matter. The personal matter. Working on it. He said it flat because it was the only way to say it and keep functioning. Stay where you are. Stay off your cell. I'll come to you when I can. He hung up. He stood on the corner and looked at his personal phone, the one that had received the photograph, the one that Sal's people now knew the number of, and he powered it off and dropped it in a trash can on the corner. He kept the prepaid Elena had left him. He kept the new prepaid from the apartment closet. He hailed a cab. He gave an address 8 blocks from where he actually needed to go, paid cash, and walked the remaining distance, through alleys he knew from a younger version of his life, the years before the Empire, before Elena, when he had moved through this city the way water moves, finding the low routes, the unseen paths, the places between places where a man could exist without being tracked. He arrived at a building on the Lower West Side that appeared, from the outside, to be a plumbing supply warehouse. It had been a plumbing supply warehouse until 12 years ago, When Dante had purchased it through 3 layers of corporate structure and converted the upper floor into something else entirely. He let himself in through the service entrance. He climbed the stairs. He unlocked the upper floor with a key he kept on his person at all times. A habit so old it had stopped being conscious. The room was exactly as he had left it. The last time he'd been here 4 months ago, he calculated, just before Elena had started going quiet. A table, 4 chairs, a landline phone, a safe built into the east wall. The kind of space that existed for situations exactly like this one. A place that was not in any record, connected to no name, known to no one except the man who used it. He sat at the table. He placed both prepaid phones in front of him. He thought about Sal Ferrara. He forced himself to do it, to go back through every interaction, across 22 users, and look at it with different eyes. Not with the eyes that had trusted Sal, that had leaned on Sal, that had called Sal at midnight, because it was the steady one, the reliable one, the man who had survived everything. With the eyes that now knew Sal's name was on a list, written in his wife's handwriting, beneath 4 other names that had already been confirmed. He found things he had explained away. Small things. A meeting that Sal had arranged and then not attended. Conversation about Vivian, early on, in which Sal had been not quite dismissive, but not quite interested, the specific neutrality of a man who already knows the answer to the question being discussed. The midnight call, when Sal had said, "I wondered when you'd find it, no," that had been Elena. Sal had said how many and where and had sent 3 men to an address he should not have been given. 3 men, not 4. Elena had said 4 trustworthy men and Sal had sent 3. The 4th man had gone somewhere else, to a gas station with a camera. Dante sat with that for a moment. Then he picked up the first prepaid phone, the one Elena had told him to wait on, and he waited. It rang 11 minutes later. "You got out," Elena said. "Yes, they sent someone to the building." "I know. I was already on the roof." A sound on her end, not quite relief. The compressed version of it that people make when they have been holding their breath and cannot afford to let it all go at once. Dante. "Sal's people are not the only ones looking for me. Marco has people moving too. I've changed locations twice in the last 3 hours. Where are you?" "I'm not going to tell you over a phone." "Elena not going to tell you over a phone," she said again, patient and immovable. "What I'm going to tell you is that the 48-hour clock has 37 hours left. And I'm going to tell you that there's something I didn't put in the room." He went still. "What?" "I found it 4 days before I went into the hospital. I didn't have time to document it properly, and I didn't want to include it without documentation. Because it's the kind of thing that can be challenged." She paused. "There's a second financial layer, Dante. Below everything Enzo can see. Vivian built a parallel structure. It doesn't connect to the family accounts. It connects to the Caruso operation directly." Caruso. The name he had heard months ago in that fragment of conversation that had stopped when he entered a room. The name that had made his shoulders tighten in other men's mouths. "She's not just robbing you," Elena said. "She's been building a transfer mechanism. Everything that leaves the Moretti accounts goes into a holding structure, and from there it moves to Caruso. She's been liquidating the family's assets and moving them to your primary competition for 8 months. The scale of it arrived in stages. Not the money was replaceable, theoretically, in the way that things which have never actually been lost feel replaceable. The structure, the intention. This was not an ambitious woman positioning herself for power within the family. This was a woman who had decided the family was worth more dead than alive, and had been systematically dismantling it from the inside, piece by piece, with the patience of someone who has a specific destination in mind. "How much has already moved," he said. "I estimated 60 to 70 million. I don't have exact numbers. The captains who turned are on Caruso's payroll now, or close to it. Marco is the intermediary. He recruited them." She paused. Sal was the first. "Sal recruited Marco." Dante absorbed that inversion. "Sal recruited Marco 8 months ago. Sal made the initial contact with Vivian. I don't know how I couldn't find the beginning of it, but the oldest communication I documented between them is 14 months ago, before Vivian came to any of us." He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. 14 months. Sal had been talking to Vivian for 14 months, which meant he had been talking to Caruso for at least that long, which meant that when Sal had sat at Dante's table and eaten Dante's food and attended Dante's meetings and shaken Dante's hand, he had been doing all of it while having already decided. 22 years, and then 14 months ago, something had shifted. Some calculation had changed. Some offer had arrived that was compelling enough to override 2 decades, and Sal Ferrara had made a choice. Dante wanted to feel betrayed. He noticed, with the flat clarity of exhaustion, that what he actually felt was something closer to professional humiliation. He had missed it. He had been in the same rooms with this man for over a year, and he had missed it entirely. Elena, working alone with a recorder and a locked cipher, had found it. Dante. Her voice had changed slightly. I need to tell you something else. Tell me. The photograph they sent you. The one from the gas station. He waited. I let them take it. He sat forward. I was at that gas station on purpose. I knew they were following. I'd identified the car 2 hours earlier. I went there. I stood where they could get a clear shot, and I waited long enough for them to send it to you. She was quiet for a moment, because I needed to know if they had a direct line to your phone. If they sent it within 10 minutes of taking it, they had a way to get to you fast, which meant someone in your immediate circle. If it took longer, they were routing through intermediaries. It took 4 minutes, Dante said. Yes, which is Sal. He had your number, and he used one of his men to send the image directly. She paused. I'm sorry. I know what that confirmation costs. He said nothing. I'm also not at the gas station anymore, she said. I haven't been near it in 2 hours. Whatever they think they know about my location is 2 hours old. He breathed. He pressed his free hand flat against the table and felt the solidity of it. You're the most frightening person I've ever encountered. I'm a woman who had 4 months and nothing else to work with. A silence. Not warm, not cold. Real. I need you to do something for me. Name it. There's a man named Philip Garrett. He's an attorney. He does not work for the family. He's never had contact with the family, and Vivian doesn't know he exists. I went to see him 3 weeks ago. He has a sealed package from me, documents, a copy of the hard drive, a set of instructions. He's been waiting for my call. She gave him an address. Go there. Tell him Elena sent you. Tell him the word is locksmith. He'll give you everything. What's in the package? Leverage, she said. A different kind, not for the captains. For someone bigger. She paused, and in the pause he heard something shift in the ambient sound around her, a door, or wind, or both. I have to move. Don't call this number again. Wait for me to call you. Elena. How long? But she was already gone. He drove to the attorney's building. It was 2 a.m. by then, and the building was closed, and Dante touched at the locked front entrance and pressed the call button for Unit 4, and waited. A voice came through the intercom mail, not so surprised. Who is it? Elena sent me. The word is locksmith. A pause. Then the door buzzed open. Philip Garrett was a small man in his late 50s, the kind of slim that comes from decades of not eating enough rather than from discipline, with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that had the deeply lined quality of someone who had spent a career with other people's worst problems. He was dress jacket, tie loosened but present at 2 a.m, which told Dante that he had been waiting. He looked at Dante for a moment with an expression that contained neither fear nor deference. You're the husband, he said. Yes. She described you accurately. He said it in a tone that suggested the accuracy had not been entirely flattering. Come in. The office was small and organized in the way of a man who handles sensitive material, nothing left out, nothing visible that should not be visible. Garrett went to a cabinet, unlocked it with a key from his vest pocket, and removed a sealed envelope and a hard drive case. She told me you'd come, he said, setting them on the desk, either you or a police detective. She gave me specific instructions for each scenario. What were the instructions for me? Give you the package and say one thing. He looked at Dante over the glasses. She said to tell you, the package is not a weapon. It's a door, and she said you'd understand the difference. Dante picked up the envelope. Did she tell you what was in it? She told me enough to know that I wanted to be very careful about who I was in a room with for the next several days. Garrett was matter-of-fact about it. She also told me that if I hadn't heard from her within 72 hours, I was to contact a specific agent at the federal field office. He paused. Not the local precinct, the federal office. Dante looked up. She made contact with them 6 weeks ago, Garrett said, not as an informant. As she used the term interested party with documentation. She gave them enough to open an interest without giving them enough to act. She said she needed the option without triggering it prematurely. Dante set the envelope back on the desk. He looked at it. 6 weeks ago, Elena had walked into a federal building while 7 months pregnant and had opened a door to the one entity that could make everything in that warehouse room not just damaging within the family, but legally catastrophic for everyone involved. She had not told him. She had built the option, kept it separate, and left him a key to a room where he would find enough to act on his own, and separately, in a sealed package with an attorney, the next layer that could be triggered if the first layer failed. She had built redundancy into a plan she had constructed alone, in secret, while he was sleeping in the same house. He picked up the package. "Tell me about the federal contact," he said. Garrett sat down. "She met with a special agent named Reyes. Caroline Reyes, out of the Organized Crime Division. Ms. Reyes was cautiously interested, I understand. Your wife provided a sample of the financial documentation. Agent Reyes indicated that if the documentation could be verified and expanded, it would constitute the basis for a significant investigation into the family, into the Caruso organization." Garrett looked at him steadily. "Your wife was very specific about that distinction. She was not interested in dismantling your operation. She was interested in dismantling the infiltration of your operation. Those are different things, legally and practically, and she understood the difference." Dante was quiet. "She's trying to protect you," Garrett said. "Not gently, plainly, the way you state a fact that you think the other person might be too close to see clearly. She has been from the beginning. Everything she built was designed to stop a hostile takeover and return control to you. The federal angle is a last resort, a way to guarantee that even if something happens to her, the information reaches someone who can act on it." He paused. She was quite worried about the "something happens to her" scenario. Dante picked up the package and the hard drive. "If you don't hear from her in 72 hours, I make the call." "Yes, make it in 60, he stood. "And Garrett, whatever she paid you—" "She didn't pay me," the attorney said. "She helped my daughter with something 3 years ago. A legal matter. I told her then that I owed her." He looked at Dante with an expression that was not unkind but was absolutely clear. "She said she hoped she'd never need to collect on it. I could tell she didn't believe that." Dante walked out. He went back to the room on the west side, and he opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. He did not expect not surveillance, not documentation. A personal photograph. Elena, maybe 30 years old, sitting in what he recognized as the back room of her father's locksmith shop, holding a small brass key up to the light, the way a child holds something they consider treasure. She was looking directly at the camera, and she was not smiling. Exactly. Something adjacent to it. The look of someone who knows something, and is deciding whether to share it. On the back of the photograph, in her handwriting, he taught me that every lock has a maker. Find the maker. Behind the photograph was a document, a name, a financial account, and a digital trail that Garrett's practice had clearly helped compile. The name was not Caruso. It was not Marco. It was not Sal or Vivian, or any name that lived inside the structure Dante had been navigating. It was a federal official, a specific senior, named official in a regulatory position, who had been receiving payments from the Caruso operation for 11 months. Payments routed through Vivian's parallel structure, which meant they were technically untraceable to Caruso directly, but which could be traced with Elena's documentation back to their source. Elena had found the bribe, not just the conspiracy inside Dante's organization, the external protection that made the conspiracy possible. The reason Caruso was willing to move this aggressively, he had bought the cover in advance. Without that cover, the entire operation was exposed. With it compromised, everyone involved became vulnerable simultaneously, and the first person to go to Agent Reyes with complete documentation became, by legal convention, the cooperating party. Dante sat with the document in his hands and understood what Elena had meant. Not a weapon. A door. The door that, if opened correctly, did not destroy everything Dante had built. It surgically removed the cancer that had grown inside it while leaving the structure standing. His phone buzzed. Not the prepaid. His new phone, a number he had picked up 3 hours ago from a contact who owed him and asked no questions. The text was from Marco Bellini. Terminal station. Kellner and 9th, 4 a.m. Bring nothing. Come alone. We have Elena. Dante looked at the time. 3:17. He read the message twice. He thought about Elena's voice on the phone, "I have to move," and the ambient sound that had shifted just before she ended the call. Wind or a door, or a car door, or the particular sound of a situation changing faster than the person inside it could manage. He thought about 41 hours becoming 37, however many were left now, and the dead man protocol, and the sealed package, and Agent Reyes waiting in a federal office with a cautious interest and a sample of documentation, and Elena's careful voice having explained the difference between an operation and an infiltration. He thought about every choice he had made in the last 11 years that had led to this specific moment, a man alone, in a room at 3 in the morning, with a photograph of his wife and a document that could save or destroy everything, being told to come to an abandoned terminal and bring nothing. He picked up the phone. He called one number. It rang once. "I need to know if you're clean," Dante said. "And I need to know fast. Because I have one move left, and if I'm wrong about you, I lose everything." The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. Then Enzo said, "Tell me where to meet you." Dante gave the address and hung up. He looked at the photograph of Elena one more time, the way she held the key up to the light, the look on her face of someone who already knows the answer and is waiting for the other person to catch up, and he put it in his inside pocket, next to the list of 5 names, and the document, with the bribed officials' account numbers, and a brass key he had been carrying since the warehouse. He stood up. He went to the door, and on the threshold between the room and the hallway, between what he had been and what the next hours were going to require him to become, he stopped. He had spent his entire adult life operating on the principle that the empire was the thing worth protecting, that the structure, the organization, the accumulated power of 2 generations of difficult choices, that was the asset. That was what you sacrificed for. That was the thing you did not let go of. He had let Elena go first, then his judgment, his captains, then his accounts, then his oldest ally. He had held on to the principle and lost everything the principle was supposed to be for. There was a woman in a train terminal, or being taken to one, or it was a lie and she was somewhere else. But either way, she was out there in the dark with their daughter, and 30-some hours on a clock she had built herself, and she had built the clock, and she had built the room, and she had built the federal option, and she had built all of it not to save the empire, but to give him back something that the empire had cost him. And she had done it for a man who had walked out of a hospital room without looking at her. He stepped into the hallway. He was done protecting the empire. He walked toward the stairs, and the decision settled into him the way decisions do, when they're finally the right ones, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with the particular quiet of something that has been true for a long time, and has only just been acknowledged. Whatever happened at that terminal, whatever Vivian had arranged, and Marco had orchestrated, and Sal had enabled, whatever Caruso's people were positioned to do, and whatever leverage they believed they held, Dante Moretti was walking into it without his empire at his back, without allies he could trust, without anything except a sealed document, a dead woman's cipher, and the understanding, late and costly and completely irreversible, that the only thing in his life that had ever been genuinely worth protecting was the one thing he had systematically failed to protect. He pushed through the building's side exit into the cold, and the city received him with its usual indifference, and he walked toward the terminal. The terminal at Kellner and 9th had been closed for 11 years. Dante knew it from before, had used it briefly, for the kind of meeting that required a location with multiple exits and no civilian foot traffic. He knew the layout the way he knew most things that had once been useful, not consciously, but in the body, stored in the part of the mind that catalogs spaces and routes the way other people catalog names and faces. He arrived at 3:47, 13 minutes early. He did not go through the main entrance. He went around the east side, through a gap in the chain link that had been there for years, wide enough for a man, narrow enough to discourage anyone not specifically looking for it, and he came in through what had been the service corridor, a long concrete passage that ran parallel to the main platform, before opening up into the terminal's central hall. He stopped at the end of the corridor and listened. Voices, 2, possibly 3. The specific acoustic of a large empty space sound traveling farther than it should, echoing off surfaces that were never designed for silence. He picked out Marco's voice, first distinctive, because Marco had a slight rasp in his lower register that he'd carried since a throat injury years ago. The second voice he didn't recognize immediately. The third he did not hear yet. He did not hear Elena. That could mean several things. He made himself consider all of them and not stop at the worst one. He checked the document in his inside pocket, still there, folded specific. He checked the prepaid phones. He had sent Enzo to a location 3 blocks from the terminal, with a set of instructions delivered in person, 40 minutes ago, in the West Side room. Enzo's had listened without interrupting and had asked 2 questions, both of them practical, and had then said that he would need 40 minutes. Dante had given him 40. Those 40 minutes were now. He moved into the main hall. The terminal's central space was cavernous and dark, lit only by the ambient glow, coming through the high windows, the orange-gray light of a city that never achieved full darkness. The old platform ran the length of the hall, elevated about 3 feet above the main floor. The arrivals board, long dead, hung on the far wall, its letters frozen in whatever configuration it had displayed on the day it stopped working. Platform 4 delayed. Marco was standing on the platform. He was not alone. There were 4 men positioned around the hall. Dante clocked them in the first 5 seconds, reading their placement the way you read a room that has been arranged for a specific purpose. 2 near the main entrance, 1 at the far end of the platform, 1 directly below Marco on the main floor, which was the position that said, "This one is for close work if it comes to it." And at the center of the platform, seated in a chair that had been brought in specifically for this, a detail that registered as fastidious. The kind of staging that said whoever had arranged this had wanted it to look a certain way was Elena. She was upright. Her coat was around her shoulders. Her hands were in her lap, not bound that he could see, but she was not moving, with the freedom of someone who could stand and walk away. One of the men from the far end of the platform was close enough to her to make the distance meaningful. Dante stepped out of the corridor and into the hall. Marco saw him immediately. His shoulders dropped slightly relief, or the performance of it, the reaction of a man who had been waiting, and had not been entirely certain his guest would arrive. "Dante," Marco said. "Marco." Dante did not look at Elena yet. He made himself not look, because if he looked, the calculation would break. And right now, the calculation was the only thing keeping this situation from becoming entirely physical, and physical without numbers was a losing scenario. He walked toward the platform. He kept his hands visible. He stopped at the base of the platform, stepped 6 steps, up to where Marco was standing. Elena 10 feet behind Marco, the close work man 4 feet to Dante's left. "You came alone," Marco said. "You said to. I didn't think you would. Here I am." Dante looked at him steadily. Marco Bellini was 51 years old, a compact man who had kept himself hard through habits that most men his age had abandoned. He had a face built for a particular kind of authority, broad, flat-planed, the kind of face that looked certain even when it wasn't. Right now it looked certain. "How long, Marco?" Marco tilted his head slightly. "Does it matter?" 14 months, if Elena's documentation is accurate, give or take. Something moved across Marco's face. Brief, involuntary. He had not known about the documentation, or he had known there was some but not how complete it was, and the confirmation of its accuracy was a variable he was recalibrating around. "She's thorough," Marco said. "She is." The room under the warehouse. Marco shook his head, and the shake was almost admiring an expression that landed wrong in the context, but was real enough. "We found out about it 3 days ago. One of the men we turned saw her car near Kellner twice in the same week. We started watching." He paused. "We didn't know what was in it until you opened it." "The dead man protocol," Dante said. Marco looked at him. "When I opened the room," Dante said, "it triggered a timer. Elena built it that way. 48 hours from the moment the door opened. Copies of everything in that room go to every captain in the organization, including yours." He watched Marco's face. 29 hours from now, give or take. The silence in the terminal shifted quality. The 2 men at the main entrance exchanged a look. The close work man to Dante's left adjusted his weight. Marco kept his face even. "Then you need to stop it. Elena's the only one who can stop it. She needs physical access to the system. Then she'll do it." "No," Elena said. Her voice came from 10 feet back on the platform level, unraised, carrying across the terminal, with the particular clarity of a space designed for announcements. She had not spoken until now, and the quality of the silence, after she spoke, was different from the silence before. Marco turned slightly toward her without taking his attention off Dante. "You'll do what I tell you," Marco said. "No," Elena said again in the same tone. Not defiant, just flat and final. The tone of someone who has moved past the point where threats produce the intended effect, because they have already accounted for the threats and made their decision on the other side of them. Marco turned fully toward her. He crossed the platform in 4 steps. He stopped in front of her chair, and he looked down at her. And Dante watched his wife look back up at a man who outweighed her by 80 pounds and had 4 armed men in the room, and she did not look away. "You are going to stop the protocol," Marco said. "Quiet now. The quiet of a man who does not need volume, because the room already understands him. Because if you don't, I am going to make the next several hours very difficult for you. And you know I mean that." "I know you mean it," Elena said. "And I know that if you do that, every medical complication that results becomes part of the documentation that goes out in 29 hours. Along with your name, your account numbers, your communications with Sal Ferrara, your communications with Vivian Cross, and your communications with the Caruso organization." She looked at him without blinking. "You think you have leverage. You have a problem." Marco hit her. It was not a considered action. Dante could see that. Could see the impulse move through Marco's body before his hand did. the loss of calculation for 1/2 second that produced the motion. An open hand, the side of her face, hard enough to snap her head sideways. Dante was already moving before the sound reached him. He covered the 6 platform steps in under 2 seconds, and the close workman was moving too. But Dante had the angle and the momentum, and 11 years of knowing exactly what he was willing to do for the person on that platform, and the close workman caught an elbow in the throat that sat him down before he got his hands up. Marco turned. He had size and position higher ground on the platform, enough weight to make this ugly. He swung, and Dante took it on the shoulder rather than the jaw, which hurt but left him standing. And he drove forward and got Marco by the collar, and the two of them went into the arrivals board on the far wall, with a sound that took the letters left on its surface and shook them loose. The 2 men at the main entrance were moving. Dante heard a door open on the far side of the terminal, not the entrance, the service side, and then 2 things happened simultaneously. One of the men from the main entrance stopped moving. The other one kept coming, and from somewhere above the upper gallery, which Dante had not clocked because it was dark and above eye line. And he had been wrong about one thing tonight, which was that Enzo had needed access from above, and not from the side. There was a sound that was not a shot, but was adjacent to one. A sharp pressure report. And the man who had kept coming sat down heavily against a support column and did not get back up. Enzo had gotten there in 39 minutes. Dante drove his knee into Marco's midsection. Marco was still strong. The return hit caught Dante across the jaw and lit up his vision for a moment. The specific white out of a solid impact, and he tasted blood on the inside of his cheek where the tooth had caught it. He did not let go. He got his arm around Marco's neck from behind, and he pulled, and Marco clawed at his forearm and got his finger in it, and they went sideways together, crashing into the edge of the platform, and Dante felt the drop coming and pushed away from it, back toward the center. The close workman on the floor was making a sound that said he was down, but not finished. The man at the far end of the platform, Elena's watcher, had not moved. Dante registered that in a half second, the way you register variables mid-motion. The man was standing at the far end of the platform, with his hands open and visible, which was either shock or something deliberate, and Dante filed it without having time to examine it. He got his weight behind Marco, and got him turned, and got him against the wall, his forearm across Marco's throat, his full weight into it, and he held it there until Marco's hand stopped pulling. Not unconscious, just stopped. Dante held the position. He was breathing hard. His jaw was beginning to announce itself, and his shoulder from the first impact was adding its own commentary, and his hands were not entirely steady, but they were across Marco's throat, and the room had gone quiet. "Don't," Dante said. "Think very carefully." Marco's eyes still sharp, still calculating. The man had not stopped thinking for 1 second of this, moved around the room, taking inventory, reading what was left. 1 man down at the entrance. 1 against the column, seated. Finished. The close workman on the floor, breathing, not standing. The watcher at the far end, still not moving. Enzo somewhere above. "It's done, Marco," Dante said. Marco's jaw worked. He swallowed against the forearm. The accounts, frozen. 20 minutes ago, Enzo completed the second layer freeze. Everything Vivian built, everything routed to Caruso. Locked, he paused. And in about 4 minutes, the documentation I brought tonight gets handed to a federal agent who has been waiting for it since Elena made contact 6 weeks ago. Marco went very still. The accounts, the routing structures, the bribed official, your communications, Sal's communications, everything. Dante looked at him. But here is what Elena built it, for what she spent 4 months building it for, not to destroy anything, but to give everyone in this room a very clear choice. Because it touches the Caruso operation more completely than it touches mine. And the first person to confirm the documentation and cooperate is, legally, in a very different position than everyone else. He held Marco's gaze for 3 full seconds. "So think carefully," Dante said, "about what you tell the next person who asks you questions." He stepped back. Marco did not move. He stayed against the wall and breathed and looked at Dante with an expression that was not defeat. Defeat had a quality of completion to it that this did not have, but was the expression of a man in the middle of a rapid and unpleasant recalculation. Dante turned. Elena had stood up from the chair. She was on her feet, one hand on the chair back for balance, her other hand pressed against her stomach. The side of her face, where Marco had hit her, was red and beginning to show the deeper color beneath. She was looking at Dante with an expression he could not immediately classify, not gratitude, not relief. Something more complicated than either. He crossed the platform. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at her face, the mark on her cheek, the exhaustion around her eyes that was older than tonight, the particular quality of her stillness that told him she was managing pain and not showing it. Lena, he said. I'm all right, she said it before he could ask. The baby's all right. I've been tracking, I'm all right. He reached up and touched the side of her face, careful, just his fingers against the edge of the bruise forming. She let him. The watcher, she said quietly. At the end of the platform. His name is Garrett's Contact Federal. He's been here for an hour. I arranged it. She looked past Dante toward the man at the far end, who had now produced identification and was on a phone, speaking quietly and quickly. When Marco sent me the text to use as bait for you, I had already called Garrett. Garrett called Agent Reyes. Reyes sent him. Dante absorbed this. You arranged the federal presence, he said. I couldn't be sure you'd make it to Garrett before the terminal, so I arranged both. She looked at him steadily. I was not going to rely on a single point of failure. He stared at her. He thought about every version of the word careful he had applied to himself across his career. Every calculation, every contingency, every system he had built to ensure that no single point could collapse the whole. He thought about the pride he had taken in it. You outbuilt me, he said. I had more at stake, she said it simply, not as an accusation, as a fact. Below the platform, the federal agent Young, plainclothed, still on his phone, had moved to where Marco was standing. Dante heard the word cooperating used, and then documentation, and then a phrase he recognized from the specific grammar of federal procedure that meant the conversation had moved from threat to transaction. Marco was talking. Dante turned back to Elena. She was looking at the side of the hall, at nothing specific, the middle-distance stare of someone who has been running on decision-making and adrenaline for a long time and has just hit the wall where the body begins presenting its invoice. When did you last eat, he said. This is not the time. When she blinked. This afternoon, sit down. Dante, Elena. He said it the way she said things when she meant them absolutely. Sit down. She sat. He crouched in front of her. He was at eye level with her this way, which was not a position he occupied often, and he stayed in it. Her face in the gray-orange light of the terminal was tired and marked and specific, the face of a particular woman who had made particular choices. Not a symbol, not a concept. Just Elena. Just the person he had been systematically failing to see for longer than he had understood. I need to tell you something, he said. She looked at him. Not about the accounts, or the protocol, or the federal timeline. Not about any of that. He held her gaze. I need to tell you that I spent the last 11 years treating you like a room in a house I owned. Something I'd furnished and closed the door on and expected to remain exactly as I left it. He paused. His jaw was throbbing now, and his shoulder was beginning to stiffen, and he stayed where he was. I was wrong, not strategically, not situationally. I was wrong about what mattered, and I knew it, and I closed the door anyway. Elena was quiet. You built the thing that saved this, he said. Not me, you alone, while I was— He stopped, let it be incomplete. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I know. Not softly, not forgivingly. Just directly, I know. As if she had known for a long time and had been waiting for him to catch up, and he had finally caught up, and that was worth something. But it was not the end of anything. The protocol, she said. I have to reset it. Tell me what you need. My laptop. It's in a bag at the Garrett office. I left it there 3 days ago. She shifted her weight. If I don't reset it in the next— She checked her watch. 26 hours the copies go out. Do you want them to go out? She paused. It was a real question. He meant it as one. Because Elena had built that protocol as a last resort, a dead man failsafe, and the situation had shifted. The federal presence was in the room. Marco was talking. The documentation was already in Agent Reyes' hands through Garrett's sealed package. The dead man copies going to the captains might no longer be necessary. Or they might be exactly what was still needed. She thought about it for 3 seconds. Reset it, she said. Let Agent Reyes work with what she has. If we trigger the captains now, half of them panic and lawyers start moving documents, and the federal case gets complicated. She looked at him. Give Reyes the clean path, all right. And Vivian. Dante stood. His knee protested. He had come down hard on the platform edge in the struggle with Marco, and something in the joint was loudly registering its objection. He straightened anyway. What about her? She left the house when you left. Where did she go? I don't know. Elena's expression told him that was the problem she had been waiting for him to identify. She has the second layer routing access. If she moves money out of the parallel structure before Enzo completes the freeze. Enzo said he completed it. Enzo completed what he could identify from my ledgers. But there's a subset 3 accounts I wasn't certain about when I wrote the documentation. I marked them in the ledgers with a specific notation. Did he see those? Dante pulled out his phone. He called Enzo. Enzo answered in one ring. I'm still in the upper gallery. The ledgers, the 3 accounts marked with a double notation. Did you freeze those? A pause. Keyboard sounds. 1 moment, another pause longer. 2 of 3. The third, I need an additional access code. The account is structured differently. What's the account number? Enzo gave it. Dante handed the phone to Elena. She looked at the number. She looked at Dante. This is the one I wasn't sure about, she said. I found it 5 days before I went to the hospital. I hadn't confirmed it yet. Can you access it? Not without getting to a specific terminal. She was already thinking he could see it. The processing happening behind her eyes that was not panic but was very fast. Vivian can access it from anywhere. It's structured to her biometric. She set it up outside the family system entirely. It's hers. How much is in it? Elena looked at him. How much, Elena? When I found it 5 days ago, she said, it held approximately 38 million. The number sat in the terminal air. 38 million in an account structured to Vivian's biometric access, not frozen, not in the federal documentation, because Elena hadn't confirmed it in time, and Vivian had left Dante's house hours ago and had not been located since. If Vivian got to that account before the freeze could be extended, before Enzo could find the override, before Elena could get to a terminal that could reach it, before Agent Reyes could add it to the warrant that was presumably being typed somewhere in a federal building right now, $38 million disappeared into Caruso's structure, and Vivian Cross walked away from everything with enough to disappear. Dante took the phone back from Elena. He put it to his ear. Enzo. Can you freeze it without the access code? I can flag it. I can create a hold on the outbound transactions for 6 hours maybe. After 6 hours, the system resets the flag automatically. Flag it now. 6 hours flagging. Dante ended the call. He looked at Elena. 6 hours to find Vivian Cross and get access to an account before the hold expired. And $38 million made the rest of this the documentation, the federal presence, the frozen accounts, the testimony Marco was presumably providing in a quiet corner of the terminal, right now less complete than it needed to be. Elena was reading his face. She's not running yet, Elena said. How do you know? Because she doesn't know about the flag, and she doesn't know that Marco is talking. She thinks she has more time. Elena stood, steadier than before, her hand on the chair back for 1 moment and then not. She'll go somewhere she considers safe. Somewhere she's prepared. Where? Elena looked at him. Where does Vivian Cross go when she needs to disappear? Dante thought. He thought about the years he had known her, the meetings, the late nights, the conversations he had believed were intimate and now understood were architectured. He thought about the things she had mentioned in passing, the kind of details people provide, when they want you to know something without saying it directly, the personal geography of a woman who had been building an exit strategy while building everything else. He thought about a specific conversation 14 months ago, before he had understood the timeline. Vivian had mentioned casually a property, a waterfront property. Not hers, a client's, she had said, with the particular inflection she used when the truth was adjacent to what she was saying. I handle the management. He looked at Elena. The waterfront property on Pelham Bay. Does that mean anything to you? Elena's expression shifted. Not surprise recognition. I have a photograph of her car outside a building on Pelham Bay 3 months ago. I didn't know what it was. It's a managed property. She handles it, which means she has access, which means she's been there before and knows the layout and probably has resources there. Elena met his eyes. That's where she is. Dante picked up the federal agent's attention from across the room. The man was still on his phone, but he had been listening, the practiced half attention of someone trained to track multiple conversations. Dante walked to him. Pelham Bay, Dante said. Waterfront property managed under Vivian Cross's name or an adjacent entity. I need that address, and I need your people there inside 2 hours. The agent looked at him. Young, Dante registered younger than he'd seemed from across the room. The kind of young that is trying to look seasoned and mostly succeeding. I need to make a call, the agent said. Make it fast. There's a 6-hour window on a $38 million account, and 4 of those hours are already yours. The agent made the call. Dante walked back to Elena. She was standing at the edge of the platform, looking down at the main terminal floor, at the quiet, collapsed aftermath of what had happened in this room 20 minutes ago. Marco being talked through something procedural in a far corner. Enzo coming down from the upper gallery. Moving carefully, an old man who had just spent 40 minutes in an uncomfortable position doing something that required precision. Dante stood beside her. They stood there for a moment in the kind of silence that has too much inside it to be comfortable, but that both people understand is necessary. When this is over, Dante said. When this is over, Elena said, we are going to have a very long conversation. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. When this is over and I have slept for approximately 1 week. I know. And I am not going to make it easy. I know that too. She looked at him sideways. Something moved across her face, not forgiveness, not yet. Not anywhere close to yet, but something that was at least in the same territory as acknowledgement, that he was here, that he had come, that he had walked into the right room tonight instead of the wrong one. Protocol still needs resetting, she said. Garrett's office. I'll drive you, and then Pelham Bay, and then Pelham Bay. She stepped down from the platform. He was beside her before she reached the bottom step, not taking her arm, not managing her, just present. Close enough that if she needed the balance, it was there. She didn't take it, but she didn't move away from it either. The terminal was quiet around them, the arrested quiet of a place where something has happened, and the air has not yet decided to release it. Above them, the arrivals board held its frozen message in the dark. Platform 4. Delayed. Dante walked with his wife toward the exit, and somewhere across the city, in a waterfront property on Pelham Bay, Vivian Cross was calculating how much time she had left. She had less than she thought. The drive to Garrett's office took 19 minutes. Elena sat in the passenger seat with her coat pulled around her shoulders and her hand resting on her stomach, and she did not speak, which was not unusual. For Elena, she had always been a person who processed in silence, who let the interior work happen before the exterior followed, but the quality of her silence tonight was different from the silence he was used to. It was the silence of someone who has been running on a particular kind of fuel for a very long time and has just felt the tank register something close to empty. Dante drove and did not fill the quiet. He had spent 11 years filling silence with the wrong things. He was done with that. His jaw ached where Marco had connected. His shoulder had stiffened into something that would need attention, not urgent, but the kind of physical complaint that compounds of which he understood was also a description of most of the other failures of the last 11 years. He drove and breathed and watched the city pass outside the window and thought about a waterfront property on Pelham Bay and a 6-hour window that was now closer to 5. Garrett was waiting at the office. He had received the call from his federal contact agent Reyes, who had apparently been awake and at her desk, and not surprised by any of this, which said something about Elena's prior conversations with her that Dante intended to ask about later, when later was a concept that applied, and he had Elena's laptop case ready at the door. Elena sat at Garrett's desk. She opened the laptop. Her fingers on the keyboard were steady in a way that the rest of her was not quite managing. The specific focus of a person doing the one thing they have prepared for, long enough that the body does it, without requiring the mind to be entirely present. Dante stood at the window. He looked at the street below quiet, the particular quiet of a city at 4:30 in the morning, when the last night is over and the first day has not yet begun. He listened to the sound of Elena typing, and Garrett moving quietly in the background, and the distant infrastructure of a city that did not stop. Done, Elena said. Dante turned. She had closed the laptop. She was sitting back in the chair with her eyes closed and her hands in her lap, and she was breathing through her nose, slowly, the way she breathed when she was managing something. The protocol is reset, she said. The copies won't go out. All right, she opened her eyes. She looked at him across the room. Go to Pelham Bay. I'm not leaving you here. Garrett is here. And Agent Reyes is sending someone to sit outside within the hour. She held his gaze. You need to be at Pelham Bay before Vivian understands what's happened. If she finds out Marco is talking before you get there, she moves the money and she runs, and you lose her. Elena Dante. She said his name with the particular weight of a woman who has earned the right to end an argument before it begins. I am safe. My daughter is fine. Garrett has 3 locks on that door and a federal escort incoming. Go. He looked at her for a long moment. He wanted to say something that would be adequate to the moment, to the night, to the 4 months, to the 11 years. He wanted to find the words that would close the distance between what he had been and what she had needed. He understood, standing in that office at 4:30 in the morning, with his jaw swelling and his shoulder wrong, and her sitting at a stranger's desk because he had made their house unsafe, that no such words existed. I'll be back before it's light, he said. I know. She looked at him with those tired eyes that saw everything clearly. Be careful. Not for the Empire. For your daughter. He left. Pelham Bay at 5 in the morning had the particular stillness of water at low tide. Everything exposed, nothing hidden. The landscape reduced to its actual elements. Dante arrived 20 minutes ahead of the federal vehicles Reyes had dispatched, which was what he had intended. He had spoken to Agent Reyes by phone for 4 minutes during the drive, and they had reached an agreement that was not comfortable for either of them, but was functional, which was the best that could be expected under the circumstances. The property was a 3-story waterfront building set back from the bay access path, the kind of structure that had once been a private residence and had been divided and remanaged into something more ambiguous, not quite commercial, not quite residential, the architecture of money that does not want to be identified. There were 2 vehicles in the rear lot. One of them Dante recognized as Vivian's, the black sedan she drove on days when she wanted to look like she belonged wherever she was going, which was most days. She was here. He did not go to the front door. He found the building's service entrance on the north side a habit. Always the service entrance, always the route that people stage for exits don't account for, and he tried the handle and found it unlocked, which told him either Vivian was not as prepared as she should be, or she had left it open for someone who was expected and had not yet arrived. He went in. The ground floor was storage and utility concrete floor, metal shelving, the organized materials of a building management operation. He moved through it quietly. His shoulder announced each movement that required his right arm, and he made the adjustments automatically, the recalibrations of a body managing damage while still needing to function. The stairs were at the far end. He climbed them. The second floor opened into a corridor, and then a main living space, and there was light here, actual light, lamps rather than overheads, the kind of lighting people use when they're trying to make a functional space feel like a place where a person can think. Vivian was at the dining table. She was dressed not in the clothes she'd been wearing at Dante's house, which meant she had a go-bag here, which meant this property had been a planned exit for longer than tonight. She had a phone to her ear and a glass of water in front of her and a laptop open, and when Dante walked through the door, she did not startle. She looked at him. She took the phone from her ear and set it on the table, and she looked at him with an expression that he had never seen from her before. Not the warmth she manufactured, not the calculation she deployed, not the fury she had briefly shown in his kitchen. Something stripped. Something that lived underneath all of it. The actual face of a woman who has just understood that the contingencies she prepared have not been sufficient. She ended the call without speaking into the phone. You're early, she said. You were expecting someone. I was expecting more time. She looked at his jaw. Marco, yes, is he talking? Dante said nothing. The answer was in the nothing, and she read it immediately. She looked at the laptop screen. Her hands moved toward the keyboard. Don't, Dante said. She looked up. The account is flagged. Outbound transactions are blocked for the next. He checked 4 hours and 40 minutes. You can't move it. He walked further into the room. And in approximately 20 minutes, federal agents are going to come through the front entrance of this building with a warrant that covers the account, this property, and your communication records, going back 14 months. Vivian sat back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, a gesture he had never seen from her, the involuntary backward tilt of someone absorbing impact, and then she looked at him again. Elena, she said, yes, all of it. All of it. A silence. Vivian picked up her water glass and held it with both hands and looked at the surface of the water, in it the way people look at things when they need somewhere neutral to put their eyes while they think. I want you to understand something, she said. Not as a defense. I'm past defending. She set the glass down. I looked at what you had built, and I saw how it was going to end. Not because of Caruso before Caruso. I saw the rot inside it before anyone else was willing to name it. The captains who were already turning the financial exposure, the federal interest that was going to come regardless of what anyone did. I saw it. And you decided to profit from it, Dante said. I decided to survive it. Her voice was even. There's a difference. You can be angry about the method you should be. The method was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, but don't tell me I was wrong about the diagnosis. Your organization was dying. I found a way to be on the surviving side of that, by feeding it to Caruso, by positioning myself with whoever was going to be left standing. She looked at him directly. You've done the same. No, Dante said. I would not have done it to Elena. Something happened in Vivian's face at that a brief interior collapse, So fast it was almost invisible, the kind of movement that happens when a person hears the thing they knew was coming and discovers it still lands harder than they prepared for. Elena was in the way, Vivian said. Elena was my wife. Elena was the one person in your life who saw everything clearly and told the truth about it. And that made her dangerous to everything I was building. And yes, I knew that. And yes, I worked around it, and I am not going to pretend it was anything other than what it was. She paused. I underestimated how clearly she saw. I won't make that mistake again, though it apparently doesn't matter. Dante looked at her. He had known Vivian Cross for 3 years. He had believed he understood her, her ambition, her precision, the way she moved through a room and through a conversation, always oriented toward the exit before she'd finished entering. He had found that quality attractive, once, in the way that people are attracted to things that reflect their own values back at them, in a more elegant form. He understood now that what he had seen in her was not elegance. It was the absence of weight. Vivian moved easily through things, because she had decided in advance that nothing was worth being slowed by. Not loyalty, not consequence, not the specific gravity of other people's lives. He had confused that lightness for capability. Elena moved slowly and deliberately and carried everything she touched, and he had called that liability. The federal agents, Dante said. When they come, what you tell them is your choice. But I want you to know that the documentation they're working from is complete. The bribed official, his name, his account, his 14-month payment history, Caruso's routing structure, Sal's communications, Marco's communications. Yours, he paused. All of it, Vivian, not pieces. All of it. She was very still. Elena built a complete picture, he said. She didn't leave gaps. She didn't leave herself room to be wrong. He looked at her. The only variable is what you do in the next 20 minutes. Vivian looked at the laptop, at the phone, at the glass of water. She conducted this small inventory of the table in front of her with an expression that was the closest thing to loss he ever seen on her face, and he understood that what she was looking at was not the objects, but the plan they represented months of construction. The careful architecture of an exit that was supposed to work, that had been designed with contingencies and fallbacks and positioned assets, and that had been dismantled by a woman with a locksmith's cipher and a battery-powered lantern, and the specific stubbornness of someone who had decided that the person she loved was worth more than the cost of protecting him. I want a lawyer, Vivian said. That's your right. I want it before they come through that door. Dante called the number Reyes had given him. He spoke for 30 seconds. He ended the call. 10 minutes, he said. Vivian nodded. She looked at him one more time, a look that contained, if he was reading it honestly, something that was not apology and not regret, but was in the vicinity of acknowledgement, that he was here, that she had underestimated the direction from which the end would come, that the woman she had walked past in a hospital room 7 months ago had been, by any honest measure, the most dangerous person in any room she had ever entered. Tell her, Vivian said. Dante waited. Tell Elena. She stopped, reconsidered. No, don't tell her anything from me. She doesn't need anything from me. She looked at the window, at the dark water of the bay visible beyond the glass. Just tell her she won. She didn't do it to win, Dante said. I know, Vivian said. That's why she did. The federal agents arrived in 12 minutes. Dante was outside when they came, standing on the bay access path, the cold coming off the water and finding every gap in his jacket, his shoulder and jaw, conducting their ongoing assessment of the night's events. He watched the vehicles arrive. He watched agents move through the building entrance, with the particular economy of people doing something they have done before and are not performing. He called Garrett's office. Elena answered on the second ring. It's done, he said. A silence, then the account. Frozen and flagged. The warrant covers it. Reyes has everything. He paused. Vivian is cooperating. Another silence, longer. Sal. Federal agents picked him up 40 minutes ago. He was at his house. Dante stopped. He didn't run. He was sitting in his kitchen when they came. He heard Elena breathe. Sal Ferrara, 22 years, sitting in his kitchen at 5 in the morning, waiting. Dante had turned that detail over in his mind during the drive and had not arrived at a clean interpretation. Maybe Sal's had known it was finished. Maybe there was something in a man of that age and experience that recognized the specific gravity of an ending and had decided not to add running to the list of things he'd done wrong. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Dante didn't know. He thought he might never know, and he thought that was something he was going to have to carry without resolution, which was another item for the list. Come back, Elena said. I'm coming. The drive back to Garrett's office took 23 minutes. The sun was beginning to make its preliminary announcements. By the time he arrived, not visible yet, but the darkness had changed quality, thinning at the edges, the city beginning the slow color shift, from orange-gray to blue-gray, to something that would eventually be light. Elena was asleep in Garrett's chair when he came in. Not deeply the sleep of someone who had finally allowed the body to take the minimum it needed. Sitting upright with her coat around her shoulders, and her hand on her stomach, and her face slack, away. It was not when she was awake, the architecture of vigilance temporarily down. Garrett was at his desk with his back tactfully turned, doing something quiet with papers. Dante stood in the doorway and looked at her. He had seen her sleep 1,000 times. This was different. This was the sleep of someone who had been awake for something enormous, and the other side had its own exhaustion that was different in texture from the exhaustion of the thing itself. Heavier, more honest. He crossed the room quietly. He sat in the chair beside her. He did not wake her. He sat there, and he looked at his wife, and he thought about the 4 months she had spent in a basement room, with a locksmith's cipher and a battery-powered lantern, and the particular determination of a woman who had decided that the man she married was worth saving, even when he had given her substantial evidence to the contrary. He thought about what that determination had cost her, not abstractly specifically, the nights, the fear, the physical toll of doing all of it while pregnant, while managing a house, while performing normalcy for a man who was too self-occupied to notice what was happening in the room with him. He thought about being the man who had not noticed. He was going to have to become a different one. Not in the announcement of it. He was done with announcements, with the performance of change, with the kind of promise that feels true at the moment it's spoken because the moment is emotional and the speaker is sincere. In the actual daily work of it, the slow and unglamorous and frequently uncomfortable process of a person deciding who they want to be, and then doing that instead of the easier thing. He was not certain he was capable of it. He thought that uncertainty was probably the most honest thing he had felt in years. Elena stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, the gradual return of someone coming up from genuine rest, and she looked at the room with the momentarily unguarded quality of a person whose defenses have not yet fully re-engaged. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at Garrett's desk. She looked at Dante. "You're back," she said. "Yes." She straightened in the chair. Her hand went to her stomach, the automatic check, and whatever she felt there produced a slight easing of her shoulders. Vivian, in federal custody, cooperating, the money. Recovered, or it will be Enzo is working with Rhea's financial team. It's going to take time to unwind the structure, but the accounts are identified and frozen, and the warrant is broad enough to cover all of it. He paused, including the 3 Elena wasn't certain about. She nodded. The organization, he said. What remains of it? The captains who weren't turned there are 7 who came through clean. He had spoken to Enzo about this during the drive. Quickly, the preliminary accounting. They're going to want answers. They're going to want to know what happened and what comes next, and who is standing where. Elena looked at him. What comes next, she said carefully, is a conversation we have. You and I, before any of those 7 men get an answer. I know. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. When I have slept and seen a doctor and eaten something that isn't from a gas station. She looked at him with those clear, tired eyes. But before anyone else. Before anyone else, he agreed. Garrett cleared his throat quietly. There's a clinic 2 blocks from here. Open at 6. He did not turn around. For someone who might benefit from a prenatal check after an eventful night. Elena looked at the back of the attorney's head. Thank you, Philip. My professional opinion, Garrett said, in the tone of a man who has learned to be useful without being intrusive, is that you should both go home after the clinic, and that home should be somewhere other than your current address for the immediate future, while the federal investigation processes. He's right, Dante said. Elena said nothing for a moment. Then I know a place. The clinic was quiet at 6 in the morning. 1 other patient in the waiting room. An elderly man who was reading a magazine from 3 months ago with the focused attention of someone with nowhere else to be. Elena was seen within 15 minutes. Dante waited in the corridor outside the examination room, sitting in a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them, and he listened to the muffled voices inside and the specific sound that he recognized. After a moment, as a fetal monitor, the rapid, steady percussion of a heartbeat that was not his own and was not Elena's, his daughter. He sat with that sound for the 7 minutes it lasted and felt it do something to the architecture of his chest that he did not have language for and did not try to name. The doctor came out and told him that everything was fine, the word fine, doing more work than it usually does, encompassing the specific fine of a situation that had been genuinely risky and had resolved without the worst of its possible outcomes. He thanked the doctor with a sincerity that felt unfamiliar in his own mouth. Elena came out 10 minutes later. She was moving more easily, the particular ease of someone who has received an external confirmation of something they needed confirmed. She looked at him in the corridor with an expression that was the most undefended he had seen from her since the hospital room 7 months ago, before everything, back when being undefended was still something she could afford. "She's all right," Elena said. "The doctor told me. I wanted to tell you myself." He stood up. He looked at his wife in the fluorescent light of a clinic corridor at 6 in the morning with his jaw marked and his shoulder wrong and his empire in the process of being fundamentally restructured by federal warrant. And he thought that this was not a moment he would have been capable of recognizing 6 months ago as what it actually was, which was the only thing that mattered. "You said you know a place," he said. "My father's house. It's been empty since he died. No connection to any name they know." She looked at him steadily. "It needs work. I can do that. I mean it literally. The roof leaks. The kitchen is from 1987. There are 3 broken windows. Elena, I can do that." She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary, reassessing something. Not him, specifically herself, her own read of him, running the current version against the stored version, and noting the distance between them. "All right," she said. They drove north as the sun came fully up. The house was 40 minutes outside the city, a small property on a residential street in a neighborhood that had the look of a place that had once been something and was patiently waiting to be something again. 2 stories, white paint gone gray at the edges, the leak in the roof visible from the driveway as a dark line on the fascia. Elena produced a key from somewhere in the depths of her coat. Inside, it smelled like a house that had been empty for several years, not unpleasant, just still, the smells of rooms that have stopped being lived in and are waiting. Furniture covered with sheets, bookshelves, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, an old clock on the wall that had stopped at 2:41. Elena went to the window in the front room and stood looking at the street. Looked at the house, at the covered furniture and the old clock and the bookshelves that still had her father's books on them, organized in a system he didn't recognize. At the particular light that came through the windows of a house that faces east in the morning, clean, new minted, the specific light of a beginning rather than a continuation. He thought about the brass key in his pocket. He took it out. He turned it over in his fingers. This small thing, the weight of it, the number on the bow, the mark of a room beneath a warehouse, where his wife had spent 4 months building the thing that saved both of them. He set it on the table between them. Elena turned from the window. She looked at it. She looked at him. "That key saved my life," he said. She crossed the room slowly. She stood at the table and she looked at the key, and she picked it up and she turned it over in her fingers the way he had, the way she had held it up to the light in the photograph in his pocket, and then she set it back down and she pushed it gently toward him. "No," she said. "You saved yourself when you finally chose the truth." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, all of her, in the morning light, tired and marked by a night that had asked too much, and a season that had asked far more than that, carrying their daughter, and the weight of everything she had carried, alone because he had left her alone to carry it. He looked at her and understood what it cost her to stay when every reasonable instinct would have said leave. What it had cost her to build the room instead of using it as a door. What it would cost him now to be worth what she had paid. He reached across the table. He did not take her hand. He put his hand on the table near hers, close, available there, and he waited. Elena looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She breathed once, slowly through her nose. Then she put her hand in his, not warmly, not with ceremony. The way you accept something that you've decided to accept, fully aware of what it is, fully aware of what it is not yet, and choosing it anyway, not because it is easy or safe or without condition, but because the alternative is to let go of the last living thing in a season of losses, and she was too honest and too stubborn and too much her father's daughter to do that. "I'm not forgiving you today," she said. "I know. I'm not going to make this easy, I don't expect that. And if you make me build another room," she said, "I will build it better." He almost smiled. It pulled at the bruise on his jaw, and he let it pull. "I believe you." She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she looked at the house around them, the covered furniture, the stopped clock, the light coming in through the east windows. "The clock needs winding," she said. "I'll do it." The roof needs patching before it rains. I'll do that too. And the kitchen, Elena. He squeezed her hand once, gently. I'll do it. She looked at him. Then she looked at the table, at the brass key sitting between them, small and specific, and waited with everything it had opened and everything it had protected, and the long, difficult, unglamorous work that still lay on the other side of this morning. She left it there. She turned toward the stairs, toward the sound of a house beginning to wake up around them, toward a room she had not slept in since her father died, in a day that was going to ask her to rest before it asked her for anything else. She put her foot on the first stair. Dante, she said. He looked up. Wind the clock first, she said. I want to hear it. He picked up the key from the table. He crossed the room to the old clock on the wall. He found the winding mechanism simple, the kind built to last, and he wound it slowly with care, and felt the mainspring take the tension and hold it. The clock began to tick. Elena stood at the top of the stairs and listened. Then she walked down the hallway, and her footsteps moved away, and Dante stood in the front room of a house that smelled like the beginning of something, and listened to the clock count its way forward, second by second, into the morning. The empire was gone. What was left was harder to name and worth more to keep. He stood there a moment longer. Then he went to find where they kept the tools. He found the tools in the basement. A wooden cabinet against the far wall, the kind built by a man who believed that things should have a place and stay in it. Her father's logic made visible, the same logic Elena carried in her bones without knowing she carried it. Inside the cabinet, a hammer, a set of screwdrivers organized by size, a handsaw, a level, a roll of weatherproof sealant tape still in its packaging, nails sorted into labeled jars, a flashlight with fresh batteries, which told him someone had been here recently enough to maintain it, and he understood after a moment that it had been Elena. During the months she had been building the other room, she had also been quietly maintaining this one. He took the sealant tape and the flashlight and went up to the roof by the pull-down attic access on the second-floor landing. The roof was cold and still damp from the last rain, the dark line on the fascia he had seen from the driveway, marking a gap in the flashing around the chimney stack, straight forward, the kind of repair that required patience more than skill. He worked slowly and methodically, pressing the tape into the gap with his thumb and working it flat with the heel of his hand, his shoulder protesting every motion that required him to reach above his head, but manageable, the pain clarifying rather than debilitating in the way that physical discomfort sometimes does when the mind has been through worse. The sun was fully up by the time he came back down. He stood on the second-floor landing and listened to the house, the clock ticking below, the particular creak of a structure adjusting to the morning temperature, and from behind the closed door at the end of the hall, the even breathing of a woman who had finally let herself stop. He did not open the door. He went downstairs and he looked at the kitchen. She had not exaggerated about 1,987. The appliances had the particular quality of things that had survived long past the era, that produced them through sheer refusal to break down a refrigerator that hummed with the determination of a much younger machine, a stove with 4 burners and a pilot light that required a match, cabinets whose hinges had developed their own opinions about the angle at which they preferred to hang. He went through them methodically. He found what there was, which was not much, the stores of a house maintained but not occupied, canned goods and dry staples, and a jar of coffee that was older than he preferred to think about. He made coffee anyway. He sat at the kitchen table while it brewed, and he looked at the wall, and he let himself be still in a way he had not been still in. He could not calculate how long. He was not a man who sat still easily. His entire adult life had been structured around motion, around the forward pressure of decision and action, and the relentless maintenance of an organization that required his constant attention, the way a body of water under pressure requires the constant integrity of its container. The container had cracked. More than cracked, it had required complete reconstruction, and the reconstruction was going to happen under federal supervision, at a pace not of his choosing, with outcomes he could not fully control. He found, sitting in that kitchen in the early morning, that the absence of control was not what he had spent 30 years believing it would be. It was not collapse. It was something closer to the feeling of setting down weight you have been carrying for so long you have forgotten. It is not part of your body. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He carried one upstairs. He knocked on the bedroom door quietly, the knock of a man who is not certain of his welcome and is not assuming it. Silence. Then come in. Elena was awake. She was lying on her back on the bed with the covers pulled to her waist and one arm behind her head, looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has slept enough to restore function and is now in the first waking minutes of understanding what day it is and what the day contains. He set the coffee on the bedside table. He stood there. She looked at the coffee. She looked at him. She sat up slowly, moving with the careful deliberateness of a woman in her third trimester who has had an extremely physical night. And she picked up the cup and held it in both hands and looked at him over the rim. The roof, she said, patched. It'll hold through the next rain. Properly reflashed in the spring. She nodded. She drank. She looked at the window, the morning light, the residential street, a neighbor's cat crossing the sidewalk below with the unhurried authority of something that owns every surface it touches. My father used to sit in the kitchen on Saturday mornings, she said. He'd be up before anyone. He'd have the coffee made and the newspaper on the table, and when I came downstairs, he'd already be 3 sections in. She paused. He never made noise. He could fill a room without making noise. Dante said nothing. He understood he was not being asked to respond. I thought that was ordinary, Elena said. I thought that was what men were. And then I grew up and I discovered that it was actually very rare, and that I had spent my childhood thinking the exception was the rule. She looked at the cup in her hands. That's the thing about growing up in a house, where someone does the quiet work. You don't know it's work. You just think it's the way houses are. Elena. He looked up. I heard you, he said. I'm not going to turn it into a speech. I just want you to know that I heard it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, There's a hardware store on the main street. Opens at 8. The third window on the south side, the latch is broken. Has been for 2 years. She set the coffee cup down. I kept meaning to ask my father to fix it, and then I ran out of time to ask him. I'll fix it today. The parts aren't expensive. Elena. He said her name the way she said things she meant entirely. I'll fix it. She looked at him with those clear, tired, assessing eyes, the eyes that had seen through 4 months of conspiracy, and had built the thing that ended it, and had pushed a brass key back across a table, because she understood the difference between what saves a man and what the man tells himself saved him. She did not say anything else. She picked up her coffee and she turned toward the window, and she watched the cat finish, crossing the sidewalk, and disappear under a hedge. And Dante stood in the doorway of her father's house in the morning light, and understood that this specific, quiet, unspectacular moment was the first true thing to happen between them, in longer than he could honestly trace. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not the completion of anything, a beginning. The clock ticked downstairs. Outside, the street was waking up a car, starting somewhere, a door opening. The ordinary percussion of people beginning their ordinary day, in the particular way of people who do not know what the night just produced and would not have believed it if told. Dante went downstairs. He put on his coat. He went to find the hardware store.